Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. My name is Christina Cosgrove Rooks, and I'm a manager of special projects at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. My office currently oversees the program implementation of all school security funding within our agency. This afternoon, we're going to be providing information regarding the post-award process. I'm joined by Heather Masshart, the Deputy Director of School Safety here at PCCD. While we will be providing you with guidance on how the post-award process works, additional information related to program implementation and fiscal requirements can be found within the funding announcement, PCCD's applicant's manual, and standard grant subconditions. As an awardee, it is essential for you to familiarize yourself with these documents just to ensure that you're in compliance with all of PCCD's requirements. So today we're going to start with a brief overview of PCCD, just in case if you're unfamiliar with us or new working with us. We will then discuss quarterly program and fiscal reporting and project modification request, otherwise known as PMRs. Additionally, we will briefly review the types of monitoring that may occur during your project, and finally provide some helpful hints to ensure the success of your project. So since many of you might be unfamiliar with PCCD, we just wanted to give you a brief overview. Our agency was established in 1978 through Pennsylvania state law and serves as the Commonwealth's justice planning and policymaking agency. Our mission is to enhance the quality, coordination, and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, to facilitate the delivery of services to victims of crime, and to increase the safety of our communities. We are directed by an overarching commission board, which is advised by 8 different advisory committees and 2 training boards. PCCD's responsibility and programs fall into a number of different areas, including funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims compensation, and training, among other responsibilities. If you're interested in learning more about these areas, I encourage you to check out our website. I just wanted to provide a quick snapshot of the types of programs we support. We started to receive school safety and security funding in 2018, and then we took over the non-public school funding in 2024. Again, congratulations on receiving a Targeted School Safety for Non-Public Schools Award. Some of you may have already been awarded, and some are still working through the eGrants application process. As a reminder, a grant is not considered officially awarded until the signature page is electronically signed and submitted back to PCCD. Just a quick note about the signature page. Your award notification may not be available to you on the same day that your grant is awarded in eGrants, due to being signed internally at PCCD first, prior to it being sent to you. If you have not received the award notification with a week of your grant being awarded in eGrants, please feel free to reach out to us. Once PCCD receives the signed award notification, you're ready to begin your project. We're now going to provide an overview of the post-award process. However, as we stated earlier, more detailed requirements of managing your grant can be found within the PCCD applicant's manual. Now I'm going to hand it over to Heather to discuss a few conditions that may have been added to your award.
Thanks so much, Christina. We're going to talk a little bit about the conditions for school security personnel and assessments. So you will probably see that there are 2 conditions that have been included on your grant in the e-grant system. One of those is related to school security personnel, and the other is related to physical or behavioral health assessments. These conditions will only apply if your grant includes funding in either of these areas. So we're going to break these down a little bit. It is important to be aware of these conditions as you are beginning the process of employing or contracting for school security personnel, or in the process of finding an assessor to conduct either a physical security or behavioral health assessment with your grant funding. Your program or fiscal staff may have already added a comment about these areas in your grants as well. In order to understand the requirements for school security personnel, it's important to first understand that the Pennsylvania School Code specifically defines and outlines 3 types of school security personnel for schools in Pennsylvania: school police officers, school resource officers, also known as SROs, and school security guards. It's really important to use these specific titles and terms when talking about school security personnel in grant applications and reports, because there are different requirements and different levels of authority for each of these types of personnel. Some schools prefer to call their school security guards a school security officer or campus security or something similar. And that is fine when you're giving them titles within your school and talking about them with your school community. But please try to use these specific titles that are listed here on your screen when talking about them in your grant documentation, so it's clear which requirements and allowances apply. You can find the specific definitions, allowable duties, the qualifications and training requirements for each of these in Article 13C of the Pennsylvania School Code. The specific legal citations are listed on this slide. As a quick overview, school police may be contracted or employed by a school and must be appointed by the County Court of Common Pleas as designated by your school board or administration. It is the court that authorizes their duties, such as whether they can carry a weapon, whether they may issue citations on school property, and their overall level of authority. So school police must meet all qualification and training requirements outlined in the law, and they must wear a badge. School resource officers, or SROs, are not employed or contracted by a school. They are a commissioned law enforcement officer of a law enforcement agency, and that could include municipal or regional police, state police, or a sheriff's office. And they are stationed at your school through a written agreement between the school entity and the law enforcement agency. They maintain all authority and requirements of any other law enforcement officer. School security guards, which are the third type, may be employed or contracted by a school. They are not a law enforcement officer. They are assigned to schools for routine safety and security duties, but they do not have the authority of law enforcement to do things like issue citations, officially detain individuals, or the other authority of police. They may be armed or unarmed, and if they're armed, they must be appropriately licensed, trained, and approved by the school entity. So as I mentioned, each type of personnel has different background checks and training requirements, but all types of school security personnel must have Act 67 training, which is basic training by the National Association of School Resource Officers, sometimes called NASRO, or an equivalent training approved by PCCD. And they must have that training completed prior to entering their duties at your school. PCCD's website lists more information about the Act 67 training and also has a list of the approved school security training providers who can provide that NASRO basic or equivalent training. Schools can directly to see schedules and costs for training, and some providers do have online training options as well. The other piece of the school security personnel condition to be aware of is that for schools who are seeking to contract for either school police officers or school security guards through a vendor rather than employing an individual or contracting directly with an independent contractor, then they need to make sure that they're aware of the third party vendor requirements. SROs would never be contracted through a vendor. So your school resource officer or SRO, again, is a law enforcement officer stationed at your school through an agreement with the law enforcement agency. So contracted individuals would be school police or school security guards. If using grant funding to contract with a vendor to provide either those school police officers or school security guards, the vendor must be approved by PCCD based on the requirements of school code and criteria established by our School Safety and Security Committee. A list of approved school security personnel vendors can also be found on PCCD's website. PCCD does regularly update that list with newly approved vendors, so please reach out to your program or fiscal contact if you have any questions about these. The second condition listed addresses grant funding that will be used to complete either a physical security or behavioral health assessment for your school. Both of these items are baseline criteria items, those level 1 items, and they can be very helpful in determining where your school buildings may have physical vulnerabilities or where you may want to invest in more student assistance and behavioral health supports so that you can focus future grant applications in those areas. Assessments that you've applied for and will be completed with grant funding must align with the assessment criteria that have been approved by the State School Safety and Security Committee, either in the area of physical security or behavioral health. And grantees must use assessors who have been approved by PCCD to perform the assessments in alignment with those approved criteria. An assessment provider registry can be found on PCCD's website. And as you can see here, it allows schools to select the county of the school building where the assessment will be completed and to select whether they need a physical security assessment, a behavioral health assessment, or both. Clicking search will yield a list of approved assessors and their contact information, as well as list which types of assessments they are approved to complete. There is a robust number of approved assessors available for most counties in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Schools should contact the assessors directly to determine what their timelines and pricing is for services. And Christina, I will kick it back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. Before we discuss quarterly reporting, I wanted to provide you with just a helpful hint as you navigate our eGrant system. We know the system can be challenging for folks. As you've likely experienced already, you will receive communications and informations about items you need to complete for a grant directly in the eGrant system. If your user settings are set up to provide email notifications in eGrants, you will receive an email notification whenever you have an outstanding task to complete or alert regarding an issue or comment. In the Work Manager section of each grants, you will see task and also alerts. There's a tab for task, outlined here in red, and a separate tab for alerts, outlined in yellow here. Click on each tab to see the list of items. A task may require you to complete something prior to that task being deleted from your Work Manager. An alert provides you with information regarding the status of your grant application or reports. For instance, a reminder that a report is due soon or that the submitted reports have been approved or returned for changes. Once you delete these, they will no longer be back in your alert tab. All right, so let's talk about quarterly reporting. So once your grant's been awarded and you have started your project, regular updates will need to be provided to PCCD. All subgrantees are required to submit quarterly program and fiscal reports throughout the life of the grant. Since these grants began on January 1st, 2025, the first quarter will end on March 31st, 2025. Your first quarterly report will be due on April 20th. The program report provides PCCD with an overview of the activities that occurred. The fiscal report is where you will actually input the expenses paid during the quarter so that funds can be reimbursed to you. Grantees also have the option of submitting interim fiscal reports during the quarter to receive reimbursement sooner. Okay, let's take a little more detailed look at a program report. In eGrants, a program report can be generated 5 days prior to the end of the quarter. Once a report is created, you will be required to answer if the project is on schedule or not and discuss why the project may not be on schedule. A separate section is also provided so that you can let us know what activities occurred. For instance, if you were still obtaining quotes during the first quarter, you can just let us know that quotes were being made and provide a sentence or two on your future plans. There are two other sections that are standard on these reports, and both are not actually required for you, but their status must be set to complete before you can submit your report. So you'll have to go into each section, save it as complete, and then you will see the status change to complete on the page. If you would like to provide pictures or stories about your project, please feel free to provide them in the attachment section. There are no performance indicators assigned to your grant, so all you have to do is go into the section and save it as complete. During the first quarter, you will be asked to certify that everyone listed on your grant in eGrants has viewed this presentation. You will be asked to provide a code word that will be mentioned here during the webinar. This section will only be present for you during your first quarterly report. Right. So let's talk about procurement and purchasing. PCC requires all grantees awarded state and federal funding to abide by state or federal procurement rules. We understand this is new for many of you. However, these rules have been established to ensure fairness and equity in purchasing within the Commonwealth. The purchasing thresholds apply to monies budgeted and or paid to a single vendor, not just single line items. For example, if your $5,000 line item for security cameras and your $5,000 line item for lighting will be provided by the same vendor, you must follow the small purchase procedures as the line items add up to 10,000, which falls within the small purchase threshold. Posted on this slide are the three methods of procurement. that grantees must follow. More than likely, you will adopt one of the first two methods. The first method is procurement by micro purchases. This is where purchases are less than $12,600. In this type of purchasing, you are not required to obtain competitive quotes. However, the prices must be considered reasonable. The second method is the procurement by small purchase procedures. This is where the purchases are between $12,600 and $23,200. When this type of procedure is used, price quotes must be obtained from several sources. In addition, if only one source is available, it would be considered a non-competitive bid and a sole source approval will be needed. When this occurs, you will be required to complete the procurement details section of the grant application. The third method is procurement by sealed bid that is formally advertised. A sealed bid means that your organization releases a solicitation for items and/or services, and anyone can submit a proposal. Your agency must wait to review all proposals until after the solicitation is closed. In a sealed process, vendors should not know what competing vendors have submitted. Please be advised that professional services such as mental health providers or security services do not require procurement. If you are unsure if procurement for services are required, please feel free to reach out to your fiscal contact. Our fiscal folks have received several questions related to the procurement process, so this slide provides some additional information we think that may be helpful for you. While we understand that grantees would like us to provide very specific examples of advertising and/or the bidding process, we are unable to dictate the type of medium that is used. It is up to the grantee to decide on the method that is used by their organization. If your school has their own procurement guidelines, and these guidelines have the more parameters than PCCD's guidelines, you are required to utilize your agency's procurement method. PCCD is unable to provide payment to a vendor directly. This is also a good time just to remind grantees that grant funding is provided on a reimbursable basis at PCCD through the fiscal report. And finally, if your school conducts a sealed bidding process and you only receive one bid, please reach out to your fiscal contact so that a sole source request can be created. All right, so submitting a fiscal report is the method you will use to receive your grant reimbursement. So let's dive into that a little bit more. As stated earlier, there are two types of fiscal reports you can submit. A quarterly report is due every quarter and is required of all applicants awarded a PCCD grant. The second is an interim report. This report can be submitted if the applicant agency is having cash flow issues and would need to receive reimbursement sooner than on a quarterly basis. These reports can be submitted as often as necessary. However, you are still required to submit a quarterly report regardless of how many interim reports you submit. The quarterly report is due 20 days after the end of the quarter. Please be advised that payments are not released immediately. The fiscal report will be reviewed and approved by fiscal staff. It typically takes around 30 days for payments to be processed and deposited. If fiscal staff have any questions about the report, they may return it at any time. Prior to entering your fiscal report, you want to have these items in your possession that are on the slide here. Your accounting documentation, such as your general ledger or expense report. You should verify that your submission is within the parameters of your budget. For example, if you did not budget for travel, you can't arbitrarily enter travel expenditures into your report. Last, you will need to attach supporting documentation for your expenditures, such as timesheets, invoice, accounting records, etc. So a proper accounting system needs to be in place to show all transactions within the grant. This is an example of a general ledger provided by a grantee with their fiscal report. The applicant's manual provides additional guidance on what types of systems are acceptable. When creating a fiscal report, your request for reimbursement should match the line items in your accounting documentation. So on this slide is an example of a quarterly fiscal report. You will notice that the screen only shows a brief overview of the expenses. To drill down into a specific budget category, you will click on the hyperlink listed under budget categories. To help avoid needing to revise your fiscal report, which would in turn delay any reimbursements, be sure to keep these important reminders in mind when creating your report. The first one, Be sure to report actual expenses. Your reported expenses should match the amounts on your receipts and invoices. Do not just report the amount that you have budgeted for any particular line item. When you created your budget, we consider that to be your best estimate of future expenses. Your fiscal report should outline your actual expenses. We do expect to see some fluctuations between your budgeted amounts and your reported amounts for any given line item. Be sure to include invoices and proof of payment as attachments. You can also include any other supporting documentation you would like. Sometimes, if you have a lot of expenses on a single report, it is a great help to create and submit a spreadsheet that briefly outlines each purchase and which line item the purchase corresponds to. Remember, supporting documentations helps PCCD determine if your report can be approved and reimbursed. Help us help you by providing us with everything we need to clearly understand and follow your expenses. Just a reminder, be sure to follow procurement guidelines for all purchases. The totals in both tables on your fiscal report will need to match. You physically cannot submit a report if the totals don't match. If this happens, you'll receive an error message in red lettering at the top of your report that explains this. Remember, obligations are things you were invoiced but have not yet paid. Essentially, these are things you are on the hook for, so to speak. Only use this column if you've been invoiced for something but haven't paid for it yet. Be sure to include the invoice for any obligation listed in your report as well. For step-by-step guidance on creating and submitting a fiscal report, please be sure to check out our fiscal report walkthrough guide on our website. Subgrantees are required to keep financial documentation for all goods and services acquired with state and federal grant dollars. Subgrantees shall maintain records for all grant-related expenses up to 3 years past the final fiscal report date. These documents can include paid invoices, receipts for goods or services, contracts, bid documents, payroll records, timesheets, travel authorizations, toll and parking receipts, inventory reports, and accounting records, such as the general ledger and payment authorizations. Items that are not properly documented or counted for may not be reimbursable. Please note, PCCD will not be able to reimburse you if your school has outstanding obligations to any state agency, such as the Department of Revenue or Department of Labor and Industry. For personnel and single consultant expenditures, timesheet reporting is required. There are 2 different types of timesheets that can be kept. One is for individuals working on more than one activity, and the other is for when someone is working on a single activity. This slide provides more details on the minimum requirements. As you can see, this is an example of a timesheet kept by an employee who works on more than one activity. You can see this person works on VOCA grant activities as well as 2 other funding sources. Time spent on each funding source is separated by date and the number of hours worked on each funding stream. The timesheet must be signed by the employee and the supervisor. All right, so your PCCD grant, once awarded, is a contract between us and your school. As a result, any changes that are made to the project or line items must be included in an approved project modification request, or PMR, as we call it. As a reminder, due to the competitive nature of the targeted school safety grant, changes to the approved items listed within your SurveyMonkey application are unallowable. There may be occasions in which a project modification is needed to your budget or program to improve the effectiveness of grant activities. For non-public schools, this may include a change between budget categories. For example, if you budgeted $10,000 for cameras and $15,000 for consultants or installation of the cameras, but you end up spending $5,000 for installation and the actual cost of the cameras ended up being $20,000. This would be a change between the supplies operating expenses category and the consultant category that exceeds the 10% threshold. In this case, a PMR is needed. When you submit your fiscal report, those percentages will be shown to you, so you'll know if you need to submit a PMR or not. PCCD does allow small changes to the original budget if they directly relate to the approved expenses. In our previous example, a grantee may have realized that new wiring was needed for the installation of the cameras. A PMR could be submitted to reduce the cost of the cameras and add a new line item related to the wiring and installation of wiring. As a result, we would highly encourage you to reach out to your program staff first before adding any new line items, just to ensure that they will be approved. If you end up needing additional time to spend the funds, a PMR must be created to extend the end date. And just so you know, a PMR is not required if you're just changing the name of any grant contacts. With any PMR, it must be submitted several weeks prior to the end date, since PCCD must process these before a grant ends. Unfortunately, any PMRs that are not submitted, reviewed, and sent to the comptroller's office prior to the end date will not be able to be awarded. To ensure compliance with all grant requirements, PCCD regularly conducts monitoring of grants. We monitor grantees to ensure funds are being expended in accordance with the approved grant budget and that the grantee is complying with state and federal regulations and guidelines. Additionally, PCCD looks to ensure the project is being implemented as outlined in the grant application and that the project is achieving the expected results. To do this, PCCD will request supporting documentation for reported expenditures submitted on the fiscal report and request reported outcomes on the program report. Grantees are randomly selected for monitoring on a quarterly basis. New grantees are monitored more frequently and are considered high risk until a favorable history is established. So when selected for monitoring, you will be notified via email. The email is sent to the project director, financial officer, and primary contact on the grant application. Please be sure to read the email thoroughly just to make sure that you're sending the correct documentation. Finally, we want to highlight some important reminders related to your grant funding. You may be seeing a theme here, but reviewing the applicant's manual and standard subgrantee conditions will provide you with all of the requirements that you need to meet. Abiding by these requirements minimizes the chances of your agency ever having to return funding back to us. Next, only request reimbursement for funding listed within your eGrants budget details section. If you're unsure if an expense can be reimbursed, please contact your program and fiscal contact listed within eGrants. Third, attach all invoices and receipts to your quarterly fiscal report. This assists you in keeping track of your documentation and allows our fiscal staff to process reimbursement quickly. Please make sure our quarterly program and fiscal reports are submitted in a timely manner. Next, please update all contacts and eGrants to ensure that PCCD is able to get in contact with you. The eGrant system can only email the addresses listed within the system. So if somebody leaves your agency, please make sure that you change that information out of the system. And last but not least, please reach out to your fiscal contact located in eGrants if your banking information changes during the project period. As we said early at the beginning of the presentation, to ensure that you receive credit for this training, please enter the word cameras into your first quarterly program report and certify that you listened to this presentation. If you have any additional questions about what was presented today or need assistance throughout the grant period, please reach out to your program or fiscal contacts. If you're having a technical issue, please reach out to the eGrants Help Desk. We are here to assist you. Thanks for watching, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.